Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. Today, we are honored to have the presence of Oliver Chilton, the head blender for, a bunch of brands that I really like. But the ones we're going to be talking about today is Elements of Islay and Black Top Rum. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, as always, to Sam Filmus for organizing this and making this a reality for us. We're excited to learn about the brands and about your process, and what it's like to blend for such a wide range of different brands. But yeah, thank you for being here. Please introduce yourself, tell us about yourself, and take it away.
Hello. Yeah, so I am the blender for Elixir Distillers, which is a independent bottler, blender, and distiller. I'm kind of a bit slow on that at the moment, partly because it's early in the morning, and partly because I keep forgetting what we do, because we do so many things. We make whiskey and rum. It's probably the easiest way to put it. We started as a retail shop and an independent bottler, buying casks of whiskey and bottling them. We were ever so slightly obsessed with Islay, so we have quite a big focus on Islay, which we'll talk about tonight. And then that's kind of built from there. It started as a hobby, and now we own also 1.5 distilleries, because one's not finished yet, and as well as a few different blends and products. And then we also got into rum, releasing a rum around 2010 called Black Top. And we're slowly eating our way into making rum as well, because why not? We haven't got enough to do. So for myself, I started with the company in 2011, and I've done a bit of everything, sadly. So I'm definitely a jack of all trades and master of none, though. So please, you can ask questions and I'll do my best to muddle through. And the joy of my job is I do get to play with all the things I love all the time. I am essentially a hobbyist. I am an out-and-out whiskey enthusiast who has literally been given keys to a warehouse. And in terms of what we're going to talk about tonight, I guess the focuses are going to be on Elements of Islay, which Sukhinder, my boss, created a few years before I started in 2008, as an independent bottling brand, bottling Islay whiskey. And then I, along with him, recreated again first in 2016, and then a few years later, introducing some blended malts, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. I should say I talk a lot and I need questions, just so we're all clear. Otherwise, I will witter and my presentations are not great.
Well,
so
let's start off with an easy one. We have 6 expressions in front of us. We have 4 from Elements of Islay and two of the Black Top. What's the order you want to taste in today?
So Sam sent me a fantastic order, which I would have argued with, but it worked perfectly. So we're going to start with Elements of Islay cask edit. I don't have everything in my office, which is terrible. I could walk across to the other office, which is about 5 minutes from where I'm sitting. But it's a HMRC government-controlled site, so they tend to freak out if you walk in at 3 in the morning. So yeah, we're going to start with Elements of Islay cask edit. Elements of Islay, as it started as independent bottling, it started as us looking at individual distilleries, small batch bottlings, kind of 3, 4, 5 casks at a time. And it was all based around the idea that Islay whiskey is medicine, which it actually is, just so we're all clear, particularly as you guys are in the States. If you go back to Prohibition, the only whiskies we could legally export from Scotland were things like Lafroig and Beg, and you could import them into the States as medicine, and you could get a doctor's note saying you're allowed them. Quite famously, Winston Churchill, when he arrived, insisted on having Lafroig, and had a doctor's note for Lafroig, which I think is a wonderful thing. I think should also still happen today. We have, free prescriptions here in Scotland, so it'd be fantastic for me. But sadly, not in the UK. You still have to pay for it. The whiskey you guys are trying is a blended malt. So we created this. I'm losing track now. I think it was 2018, something along those lines. Maybe a few years later, and it's a blend of Lafroig and Kalila. So we buy. For those that don't know, we buy Castle whiskey, but we also buy new make spirit. So we fill quite a bit of Kalila every year, and then some other distillates from Islay. And in this case, we've taken a blend of around 51% Kalila and 49% Lafroig, so almost 50-50. And then we use a range of different casks. So when we're filling Kalila, we're filling it into a mixture of refill wood, so old wood, and first of all bourbon. And then in this particular case, it's majority refill. And then Lafroig, we use a mixture of bourbon, first of all bourbon and sherry casks. And I will actually have a drink even though it's 3 a.m. No one will tell my wife. I will be fine.
I do believe she just joined the room.
You know what? She's actually really happy that we're doing this tonight because it meant I slept next door in the office. So she actually got to sleep without me snoring. So more of these, Sam, is what she said. Do more of these. Right. So in terms of the kind of style and everything around this, we were looking to make a whiskey that both was definitely Islay. It's got the kind of big iodine hit, the big kind of medicinal note, but it had to be approachable. So what we tried to do is use Kalila, which is a very kind of soft, sweet, citrusy Islay whiskey. It's not, although it is very peaty, it is also quite light in style. They make quite a light spirit. So that's why that makes up around half the blend. It gives you that kind of freshness, that cleanness. And then for the Lafroig element, we were using much, I look at them as kind of sweeter, richer casks. So it's roughly speaking about 30% of the Lafroig we use, or 30% of the overall blend is first of all bourbon, Lafroig, and we use quite active casks. We use what are called unrinsed bourbon barrels. When you guys empty your barrels in the States, there's kind of 2 ways of doing that. They can just literally dump the liquid, roll the casks away, and send them to us, or they go and do subject called rinsing, which basically means they get either water or air and they search for any last residuals of alcohol. Very sensible for the bourbon producers. They get to save a bit of money. Rubbish for us. It means the casks aren't juicy. They're not basically full of bourbon. Ideally, when we're buying barrels, we want unrinsed barrels, so we get more of that impact, more of that sweetness, more of that richness. So for this, it's all unrinsed barrels, and then we use about 18% of the overall blend is sherry, and it's first of all Oloroso sherry, so it's got this richness, this darkness, kind of adding ginger, chocolate, those kind of flavors. And what we're looking for is a balance of that freshness and citrus, that sweet kind of banana-iness, and then the richness coming through from the sherry, and using all of that to kind of temper that phenolic, big, peaty style.
And I noticed this one is at 46%, whereas you do have a fondness for 54.5.
Yeah, so it's 46 partly because it does make it more approachable. We also pay an incredible amount of money in the UK based on tax on the alcohol strength. So you'll quite often see Scotch whisky. If you've ever wondered why they all go down to 40, it's because it's cheaper here, a lot cheaper. But 46% also means you don't have to chill filter, which is quite important to us as a company. Chill filtration basically involves chilling down the whiskey and filtering out certain fats that if you added water to this particular whiskey today, and you had it in a very cold room, it would go cloudy. And basically that's these kind of fatty strains congealing together. They're not bad, it's not gone off or anything like that. It just adds texture. It's not really a flavor compound, but texture. So we like to leave those in, which means if you leave it slightly higher alcohol, you can leave those in. In terms of the 54.5, I have certain strengths that I like drinking at. One is 50% and 48%. You'll see 48% used at elixir distillers a lot. That's proper chugging whiskey. You can go at that quite happily, but it maintains a lot of body. And 54.5 was basically a strength I was playing a lot around, which we'll talk about that a bit later. And so when I was testing out strengths for the other two blends we do for Elements of Islay, I ended up using 54.5, and it just worked really, really well. Kind of approachable, but still allowed people to add water. So I'm always trying to think how I, as a drinker, would approach something. And quite often I'll sit there and think, well, it's a bit strong, bring it down with water. So yeah, you're in control.
You're right. This is so approachable. This is so easy to drink.
Yeah, it was a funny thing. When we started, it was all about small batch and single cask, and then we moved into blended malts. And I'll be honest, in 2015, I had no idea what I was doing. It's all very much a learning journey. And so by the time we kind of reimagined this or rethought what we were trying to do with Elements of Islay, we really wanted this to be a way of introducing more people to that category, getting more people to drink whiskies like Lafroig and Kalila. And so I hope what we've done is create this blend that is approachable, that's soft, and it's a good kind of gateway drug, good entry into Islay.
It's very good. Did you say anything about the age on these that you put in?
I haven't, but it's we say the youngest whiskey's 7.
Okay.
The oldest will normally be around 12. And the reason we don't put an age statement on one, it's an ever-changing feast. So Kalila is relatively constant 7, 8, 9-year-old whiskies that we use. We have a filling contract there, so we have kind of really good pattern of stock. The Lafroig section changes quite a bit. So we had, when we started this project, our youngest stock was about 4 years old, and our oldest stock was 12. We're still kind of digging into the older stock to use for the sherry component in this. So it's probably, we would now reach for kind of 13, 14. And then our youngest, which is some of the bourbon stock we were using, was when we started, it was 2012 stock. And again, I mean, we've got 2012, 2013, 2014. We're still kind of going to those ages. We haven't really gone into the 2018 stock. Yeah. So that age profile changes a little bit. In terms of these blends in general and how you kind of put them together, and that's why you end up being really vague, right? Because everybody always wants detail. They want to know exact percentages and they want to know exact ages. But sadly, blending has never really worked like that. You kind of cool off bulks of stock based on a kind of generic blend, which are the numbers I can hand out. And then either myself or my colleague Andrew will go through each parcel of stock, check that it fits the profile. And I mean, like cask by cask, and then you build up from there. And what that means is you're forever altering the age and you're altering the makeup a little bit up and down because you're aiming for a flavor profile rather than aiming for saying, oh, it's specifically 10 or specifically this make. That way you kind of aim for essentially more consistency, which in theory hopefully we get if we're doing our job right. Hope that answers the question. I could have just said 7 to 12, couldn't I? That would have been quicker.
No, thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah, we want the details. But I noticed that on the label it doesn't say what distilleries it is. Is that just a
well, I guess there's two sides to that. One, you always have to be careful in Scotch in terms of what details you put on a label in general. There's some legal bits certainly to do with age, right? You can't put 7 to 12-year-old on a label. You can put 7-year-old. So you're not allowed to be transparent in that sense. In terms of distillates, we would be able to put both on the back of the label in terms of what we use. But you have to have a certain amount of respect for your suppliers, and whether they want their branding on your blends. And then there's the other one that we might change it. So, something like Lefroy in the future, we might struggle to get supply for that, so we might replace it. We are building our own distillery on the south coast of Islay, so might happily start using that as one of the components. And it just allows you that freedom to switch it later on. So if I'm giving you percentages on what we're using today, which for me as a geek, I love to know what people are doing. The caveat is if you ask me in 5 years' time, it might be slightly different. So if you pick up a bottle today, this is what's in it. If you pick a bottle in 5 years' time, phone me back and ask again, and I'll give you probably a slightly different answer.
Fair enough.
I mean, I certainly find, and I don't know about other blenders and distillers, it is forever changing what's available and what's not available, how you're working, what you're filling, and you're having to work quite a long way in advance, 5 to 10 years in advance at any one time. So you kind of have throughput, you have ideas of what you're gonna blend for the next 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, but you can't always predict what it's going to be beyond that. Brand. Everyone had that whiskey? Did you all like it? I hate asking that question.
Yeah, it's very enjoyable. It's light. It's very fruity. Very easy.
I feel like it takes the best of the Lefroy and uses the Caol to really enhance it, because I'm not a big Lefroy fan. That's one of my least favorite Islay whiskeys. And when you said that it's got Lefroy, I was like, uh-oh, I'm not going to be a fan. But it's really well balanced, and it really takes the best of the best of the Lefroy and really enhances it with the Caol. It's really nice.
Thank you. I mean, I do like Lefroy, but I find it has definite periods of time where it's producing different styles. Whereas Caol is very consistent. It's the absolute workhorse of Islay. But the one thing I do like is that it is identifiably Islay. It's very medicinal, and that is Lefroy through and through. And then I've always loved Lefroy if it's in the first fill bourbon, because you get that sweetness, you get this kind of banana note, and that's actually seems to be a signature flavor going back quite a while. So hopefully you also get a lot of fruit, because it's one of my bugbears. I learned particularly Lefroy gets labeled as this peaty, smoky, medicinal thing, and that's all it does. That's its one tune that it does. Whereas the truth for Islay is it's an island full of very fruity whiskies that happen to be quite smoky, and hopefully this kind of explores that a bit more. Grand. Should we move on to bourbon cask? All happy with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Tell me if I'm moving too fast or too slow, right? So I'm
No,
normally when I drink 3:30 in the morning, I tend to be drinking quicker than this.
oh wow,
You're
the
good.
nose of this is totally different.
So bourbon cask, in essence, it's a very similar blend from a spirit point of view. It's 57% Lefroy, so it's a bit heavier on Lefroy to the 43% Kalila. All of Lefroy in this, hence the name, is first of all bourbon. Right? So you have mountains of vanilla, and it is all built along this kind of richer, kind of foam banana sweet things. The casks themselves, they're actually all ex-Buffalo Trace barrels. They're fantastic. It's like great wood. And then the Kalila is actually where we started playing. So we used a bit of refill Kalila in this, refill bourbon. And then we used some first fill bourbon barrels. And these were, we fill up essentially each year. And where we can, we try to use it for this. And it's basically, I mean, the cooperage that sell them, call them craft casks. They're smaller production, they're toasted before they're charred. So if you go to a big producer like Buffalo Trace, you're getting something that's just charred, right? So they char the barrel on it goes. Standard bourbon barrels. Good interaction, works really well for Scotch whiskey. The other type of barrels that are used in Kentucky, which are basically more expensive, they toast them on oak chips first, and that opens up the pores a bit more. You get better interaction for the bourbon. You get better access to the vanillin, so it softens out the whole of the profile of the whiskey. And then you char the barrel, and that, so it's still charred, it's just toasted first. So we try where we can to buy those, and we have like specific projects such as this one that we put a percentage of those barrels into, and it gives this softer, almost like freshly baked bread note to it. So the Kalila is a breakdown of that. It's about 43% of the recipe in total, and about 20% of the recipe is refill bourbon barrels, and about 24% of these slightly more active, richer casks. And it just gives you this slight buildup of richer buildup of flavors. It does take water. I can't think what the weather's going to be like in California at the moment, but it doesn't love humid weather. It loves drier climates, which is an odd thing to say, but certain whiskeys seem to shine in dry climates for no apparently good reason.
It tastes just fine here in California. I'm amazed how, I don't know the word soft or smooth it is compared to the first one, especially given that it's 54.5. To me, it does not drink like that high proof.
Well, adding a little bit of water tends to help bring things together anyway. So I'm unapologetic in my reliance on water.
I'm the same way. I love to see what a couple of drops of water does to a whiskey, and it is amazing how many times it just kind of like it just makes it so much better.
Yeah, well, so that's why we add water to almost everything. Get told off quite a lot. I don't do that many cast strength things. We have one for Podaske, which is called cast strength. But historically, I've always added water in the blending process, so it really helps to bring flavors together. It seems to marry things out quite well, especially if you've got time. So we try to blend. We try to give ourselves ideally 3 months. You don't always get that long, but ideally 3 months of blending time. And it does seem to come together better. And that both the kind of time with the air and time with water seems to soften out whiskies and make them really approachable, even at high strength.
I did notice that since you brought up Port Eskeg, is that one of the reasons that you moved away from doing single malts for elements? Is because Port Eskeg is also single malt independently bottled, or what was the thinking to that?
If supply. When we started Elements of Islay, you could quite literally buy anything you wanted, and it was all cheap. It was like a magical time. you tell people about these times and they don't believe you. But you pick up, casts of Ardbeg for buttons, that fallen off your shirt. And I guess we were a bit naive. We thought that would never end. We were very lucky in that Sukinder's an obsessive collector. So he just moved from collecting bottles to collecting casks, and we had a lot of inventory. So we kept that going for a long time. Today, it's definitely more of a challenge. Islay, well, when I started, 2004, the general message was, very few people will get into Islay whiskey. It's really hard and not very approachable. And certainly that was kind of the historic approach to whiskey, that Islay was this kind of mythical flavor that most people wouldn't like. Then it turned out that that's completely wrong, and that there's whole swathes of the world that obsess about smoky stuff. Which actually, if you think about it, is not that surprising. A lot of people like barbecue, right? So essentially, Islay whiskey is just barbecue. That's what it is. So the popularity for all the distilleries in Islay grew and grew. So we're lucky in our supply for a few of them, but you can buy up casks of Ardbeg in the same way, or certainly on the same kind of price point. And elements of Islay was always supposed to be approachable. It was supposed to be something that everyone can get into. And so when you start having to charge, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, it feels slightly less approachable. Moving to blended malt allowed us, one, to get better supply. It's historic, so Scotch whiskey's been a blended product for over 200 years. So most distillers are more happy to work with you if they think you're blending their product. And two, it gave us room to play. Certainly these next two whiskies, and both Bourbon Cask, Sherry Cask, and Fireside, from my point of view, are preparation for Port and True, and their preparation for the distillery we're building on Islay, and an opportunity to learn. Port Ascaigue is just a celebration of a particular distillate and a particular style from Islay that we're looking for. So they kind of come from slightly different places.
Thank you.
And
somebody in the group made a joke that you should be called was it Compounds of Islay now instead of Elements?
Do you know, we looked at that name, not changing Elements of Islay, but calling it Compound, decided it was a bit hard. I've sat in a lot of meetings where people discuss really silly things. At the end of the day, it's just whiskey. You kind of scream, it's just whiskey, they'll drink it, it's going to be fine.
I like that approach. This one is before the water. To me, this was a lot smokier than the first one. Interesting.
Are you sure you had the right one?
Yeah, had them in the right order. But the water definitely calmed it down quite a bit.
I mean, I find the Lefroy definitely jumps out, but the main thing was going to really build up that sweetness. How you look at the sweetness of the car.
So, to get some of that sweetness, was this mostly new make from Kalila?
No, so it's majority Lefroy actually. It's 57%, but it's that focus.
No. I meant the Kalila that you used. Was that primarily new make, so that you could make it a little sweeter than it would normally be from Kalila, or
what are we on now? So 2000. Yeah,
just curious because you said you did get quite a bit of new make from.
So we filled. So today, pretty much everything for Elements of Islay on the Kalila side is our fillings into our wood.
Okay.
Though I still actually buy wood from. Strangely, I buy wood from Diageo. I buy refill bourbon from them because it's actually quite consistent. So if you can get good consistent refill wood, you do. Buying refill wood is actually quite hard because you never know what you're going to get. all the festival bourbon aspect of the Kalila in this will be from new make.
Yeah. So you go with slightly, I won't say better wood, but closer to wet casks to get a little bit more sweet than maybe Kalila get themselves.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
mean,
I
I,
was thinking.
I think the big difference is if you're buying from a distiller, and I mean that's relatively accurate, but when you're buying mature stock from a distiller, you're buying blending stock, and a lot of the wood used for blending stock tends to be older. The irony today is that a lot of new distilleries and companies like ourselves included are desperately searching for older wood because you need it to balance your products. Like you need to balance a blend, you need a mixture of older wood, used wood, and brand new wood. Brand new wood, like festival bourbons, in theory it should be a lot more expensive, but right now to find really good stuff in fill has actually become more of a struggle. Because the big distillers don't want to give it, so they can use it. They're quite happy to use it. So if you've got supply, I get a little bit of supply from Diageo, or have done historically, with refilled bourbon barrels. I take it because I love the consistency and the new make for Kalila. I mean, I don't think it needs aging, but obviously then it wouldn't be whiskey. I personally would drink it off the still. It's so sweet and so citrusy, just coming off the still. They make basically the way they produce it, they leave a lot of headroom in the still, so you get loads of reflux where the heavier vapors are falling down. And a lot of people, if you think about Diageo's distilleries on Islay, they're in Kalila and Lagavulin, and it's the same malt, that same spec malt. In fact, Kalila often takes a slightly higher phenol spec, and it is just the fact they distill it slightly differently, making it lighter. So it behaves really well pretty much in everything. But yeah, absolutely. Today we fill a pretty good percentage. In fact, I was looking at that now yesterday as I was planning on purchasing for 2026.
Yeah, from the first two, it seems like the majority whiskey is setting the general style because the first one tastes like a Kalila, but it's been slightly improved on the peatier side, and the other one tastes like a Lafroig, but it's been slightly improved on the juicier and sweeter side. So it's kind of nice to see them. They kind of make a range from one to the other.
It'll be interesting what you think of the next one because the percentages are quite extreme.
Okay. What's the next one?
So we're going to look at sherry cask next. So sherry cask, again, like bourbon cask, it's relatively obvious which way we're focused. We're looking at casks that previously held sherry. Around 78% of the blend is Lafroig, so it's massively Lafroig heavy. But wood is really the focus. We fill from a range of coopers in Spain. I tend to talk about coopers rather than bodegas, and there is a reason for that. Particularly with a whiskey like this, the cooper is absolutely king. Without wanting to bore you guys with too much sad sherry detail, the majority of casks, 99% of the casks you get from Spain are made for you. They're not. It's not from a bodega sitting there making sherry. That's not really a thing. It was never a thing. No one was ever using ex Solera casks, although we do today because it's interesting. The majority of casks for Scotch whisky since around 1983 have been made for the industry, and prior to that, they would have been casks used for the transport of sherry more than they were used for the production of sherry. So we buy wood. In this case, for Element of Islay, we buy the wood from a cooper called Joseph Valentin, and he produces. If you guys will drink whiskey, I'm sure you've tried whiskey in his wood before. You just didn't know it. So he produces for people like Glenfarclas and Kilhoman. Kilhoman get all of their sherry casks from Miguel. And a lot of people use him because he's very consistent. His process for coopering the wood, He toasts the wood, does a heavy toast on the wood, doesn't char the wood, and what that means is you get great extract from the wood. It completely ruins the wine, so it's terrible for any sherry producers. But Miguel makes his own wine, so he doesn't care. The wine in this case is very much just there to season the wood. So he'll put wine in the casks for 18 to 24 months. For anyone who thinks this is terrible, this isn't proper sherry. I promise you, this is how most of the wood is made. It's how most of it is produced and has been historically for years and years and years and years. It's just as we've all become more interested and start to ask questions, people start to explain the process. And then it doesn't sound quite right against the story of sherry slayers and all of that, which is largely nonsense when it comes to whiskey. So you end up with these really active casks that have sherry seeped into the wood. In this case, we use Oloroso. So Oloroso is actually a dry wine. It's not sweet at all. So all the sweetness you get from a whiskey like this, all that ginger, that chocolate, that kind of dark, kind of broody flavors, that's wood. That's how he's managed the wood. From a wood point of view, we use two types of oak in this. So it's American oak and Spanish oak, and they're mixed together. So he takes the staves and he builds them one after the other. And the reason for doing that is that European oak is more porous, more difficult to use. American oak is better. You guys can take that, use that as much as you like. You have the best oak in the world. Grows straight, doesn't leak, fantastic wood. So if you use American oak, you can strengthen the cask. Basically, it leaks less. That's fundamentally really important to us. Don't let it leak. And the Spanish oak then gives you these this kind of more tannic flavors, and the American oak is lending those vanillins. So we end up with quite a balance between the two. And for this particular whiskey, that's what we want. We want the ginger, the chocolate, we want the sweetness, we want that tannic structure. And then you get that undercurrent of wine, which is, sherry's a funny one. People always think of it being sweet. It's not. It tends to be dry, kind of mushroomy down. So in the case of the whiskey you're trying, what we've done is we've taken Lefroy. It was in refill wood for probably 3-4 years. We then aged it for the rest of its life in Oloroso sherry butts. Most of it's kind of 12 years old, so it spent most of its life in these sherry butts. They are bigger. They hold about 500 liters, so they're less active than the barrels that are used in the previous blends that you've tried. But the wood is so active in itself. It has lots of color and lots of these kind of darker, fruitier flavors. We actually use 2 types of cask, sherry cask, or 3 types of sherry cask in this blend. So 78% of it is these Oloroso sherry butts. And then 4% are sherry hogsheads. So they're 250 liters. They're smaller. They're heavily toasted, and they're pretty much all American oak, and they are highly active. You get loads of, they're all Spanish oak, and they're highly active, lots of color, they almost go bitter, right? It's like dark, bitter chocolate. We use only about 4% in this blend, and we use it because it adds quite literally bitterness, a bit like if you're making a cocktail and you add bitters to the end of it. It just creates length in your blend, and that's all we're looking for it to do. And then 22% of this blend is Kalila, so a much smaller segment, and we use refill sherry butts. These come out, these all came from Diageo. They were filled by Diageo, bought from Diageo. And they basically give you this kind of dank earth floor flavor. They're not as active, they're not as sweet, they're not like Miguel, they're not wood focused. It is literally kind of muddy, and it creates this lovely earthiness that we're kind of building around all the sweetness and the richness. I've now spoken for a long time. Apology. I'm a bit carried away. Anyway.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you get all those things I've just said. It is, I mean, I find it has this kind of almost tea-like, you know, like heavily brewed tea thing going on, and that is the kind of tannic structure, the wood coming through. But hopefully you still get this kind of autumnal fruits and smoke as well. Lots of smoke time.
Yeah, that one definitely, some water in that one is just makes it for me. It's really good.
I can
Yeah.
definitely taste the earthiness on the finish.
So I love that kind of dank flavor. It's one of my absolute favorite things. I find earthy, dank, kind of mushroomy thing. Ironically, that's closer to sherry to me than the sweetness that people associate with sherry. And I love the fact that Kalila gives you that. It just rounds out everything. It makes it feel old. Possibly because the Kalila is also quite old. I think we put on the blend profile, we say 7 to 12 years old, but I'll tell you now, we have absolutely no Kalila at 7 years old and refill sherry. All of it's 10 or 11 plus. So actually the youngest whiskey is probably 12, 11 or 12 years old. But it was easier to write 7. Just give yourself room. That's why I tell myself, if marketers are going to ask for something, at some point you'll change it. We mainly have much older whiskey.
The story of the casks is very interesting. I knew that most casks are sherry casks don't come from long aged sherry anymore because there's simply not enough old clerics drinking sherry. So, isn't that the
Well, yeah, I
there's
mean,
a Monty Python sketch where somebody's always wanting more sherry. He's a sort of a priest type.
I mean,
Anyway,
frankly, we should all want more sherry. It is a wonderful drink. But today, if you went to any bodega, you'd walk into the bodega and you'd see mountains and mountains of quite new looking casks, and that's all for Scotch whiskey. And even historically, the way we would move sherry. So the biggest market for sherry in the world is the UK, and that goes back over about 200 years, probably more. Even if you look at a lot of the names of the bodegas in the history, they're British names because it was all related to people from Scotland and England going into the south of Spain and building these wineries. And up until 1983, the law was that you could bottle in the UK. So you would ship the sherry in wood, and that was just, if you go back even to the 70s, I sat with John Grant once, and his first job for Glenfarclas, and he joined the business with buying casks. And I asked him, where did you used to buy sherry casks from? And he was like, Fortnum and Mason. You go to Berry Brothers and Red. You basically go to all the wine shops and the department stores, and they'd all have casks in their basements, which they were buying wine from, and you just buy those and bring them up. And if you looked at the wood, it wasn't European oak, it wasn't Spanish oak. You know, you'll hear a lot of brands talking about Spanish oak being kind of a big thing. Nobody in Jerez uses Spanish oak. Nobody. No, it's not a thing. They don't even use it in the Soleras. They quite often use wood that's not oak. That's normal. Like chestnut, you find a lot of chestnut floating around. If they were using oak, it tends to be American oak because their Soleras tend to last for 50, 60, 70 years. So they need consistency. European oak is anything but that. So this obsession with Spanish oak is a Scotch whiskey thing. So it's relative to the history of Scotch, a modern thing.
It's funny because the first thing I thought of when you said Spanish oaks was I keep seeing now Yamazaki Spanish oak, and actually tried one some time ago when my initial thought was, wow, this thing is sweet. I mean, it was just like drinking syrup.
You do get great interaction. It's because the pores of the wood are open, so you draw more from the wood, and particularly if you treat it well. You know, the coopers make a much bigger difference. We use 2 coopers for work in Spain, or we use multiple, but 2 coopers predominantly in Spain. And they have completely different regimes in how they treat their wood. So if it's Miguel, which I use a lot for heavier whiskies like Lefroy, his toasting method means that you get great interaction. If we're filling for, say, Tormel, I point that way because it's there, but you can't see it. We tend to use a Cooper in Montilla called Carsnolia, and they don't toast the casks, they char them, which is much better for the wineries. It means the wine's more usable, but you don't get as much color or cask interaction from a whiskey point of view. But what you do end up with is loads of infill, so you get loads of wine. So all his casks taste like sherry. So if you want that kind of slightly more, I mean, for me, it is that dank wood floor thing. And if you want less wood impact, those are the kind of casks you want. And I mean, that's why the Cooper is so important to the process. So you know, you can really dive quite deep into how to build a whiskey. If you spend time in Spain or even in time in Kentucky, you know, looking at barrels and how barrels are used, you can learn quite a bit about the kind of flavors you can create, which is my absolute favorite topic. So I won't talk too much because I get carried away, and then you'll all turn off.
Oh no, we love this. We actually would love to have some Coopers on for a virtual tasting to talk about. We once had some farmers who talked about how they grow corn and wheat and rye for whiskey. And that was a whole different discussion, and that was absolutely amazing. So we're down. Go down the rabbit holes. That's what we're here for.
If you ever want an introduction, Sam, just let me know. I'll happily send you Coopers. You do have to put up with them. Well, especially in Spain, not speaking the best English, so it can be broken conversations, but it can be quite interesting. I'd highly recommend speaking to Rafa at Carsnolia. He's a very interesting guy. He's a 2nd generation Cooper who actually lived in the States. He worked at Westland, strangely. So he's got this fantastic amount of knowledge when it comes to whiskey and wood. And Miguel, who we use for these casks, is incredible. The guy owns everything from the sawmill all the way through the process, and it means you get control. So I can phone him up and be like, right, this is what I want. As he supplies to everybody, but he still sends out the invoices and answers the phone, which blows my mind. And if you get a chance to go to Spain, it's an amazing trip, like to just go to the Coopers and then go through to the bodegas and see how it works together and how that kind of that journey, like they're struggling because there's not enough wine for seasoning. That's the barrier now for casks. It's wine based rather than wood based, or it's just there's not enough wine in Spain to season casks for us. It just doesn't exist.
Because everyone in the world talks about how sherry's so hard to do because nobody's drinking sherry, so there's no sherry aging in casks. But that's not accurate.
No, not at all. The difficult in Jerez is the price of must. So firstly, you should stress there's sherry casks from Jerez. You also have casks from Montilla, right? Which until recently in Scotch whisky we would also call sherry, but Montilla is a different area, different appellation. Though the process for making wine is the same, and the only significant difference between the two is the grape. So in Jerez, they pretty much exclusively grow Palomino, and so if you've ever had Fino or Oloroso from Jerez, from someone like Gonzalez Baez, it's made with Palomino. Palomino is a very boring grape. And then in Montilla, they grow Pedro Jimenez, which you almost certainly will have heard of. And all of the Pedro Jimenez used in Jerez comes from Montilla. It's very confusing. So all the wine comes from Montilla and is shipped in. And almost all of the bodegas in Spain, almost all, buy from the cooperative. So there's basically there's lots of small farmers growing grapes and then selling it to the cooperative, who sell it out to the bodegas. And that includes Lustau, that includes Gonzalez Baez, that they will buy from this one supplier essentially. And what that means is you've got kind of a set amount of wine, right, that to use both for your products that you're selling, so your wines that you're selling. If you think most people could name maybe one, maybe two sherry producers, and it will almost certainly be Lustau and Gonzalez Baez. And I bet you probably name on one hand the amount of times you've had wine from those producers, despite the fact that they're quite big. But their majority job today is seasoning for Scotch, but they're all still fighting for this one parcel of wine. They're all going to the cooperative and buying the wine from there. For Scotch whisky, most, like Miguel, will recycle the wine, so the wine will be used over and over and over and over again. So what they'll do is, if you imagine they load the wine up for 1.5 years into the cask, they take it out. They take around 1/3 of the wine and they blend that away, or they turn it into vinegar. You might have seen sherry vinegar, that's where it goes, right? And then the other 2/3 they marry with some new wine from the cooperative and they put that back to cask. That's the wine they're buying from the cooperative is exactly the same wine that the sherry producers are using into their Soleras to build up their, standard Oloroso, or their even their more aged products. So the constraint is never the drinking of the wine. It's not the constraint. Isn't that we want more casks. The constraint is how much wine can be produced in Spain, or in Jerez, or in Montilla. And the biggest problem they both have is climate. I mean, if you had farmers on, I'm sure you've had the same conversation. The barrier at the moment is the fact that the climate is making it more difficult. The growing season has changed. Palomino, I think, struggled a bit. They're now looking at other varietals and seeing if they could grow other varieties in Jerez that would sustain the heat more. I mean, it's crazy in Spain in the summer. You're now going over 40 degrees. It's not conducive to growing Palomino, and then you end up the shorter growing period. Your yields are down, so suddenly there's less wine, essentially less must for you to pull on. And everybody, whether it's seasoning for casks or making for your product, it's pulling from that parcel, which is why when you look at a producer like Miguel, he's so focused on making casks taste a particular way. He's buying from that cooperative too, and he doesn't care that the output is not drinkable because he's going to turn that into vinegar. Whereas if I go to a smaller cooperage like Arsnolia, they buy from small bodegas. Those small bodegas still want wine that you can drink. So they don't want all this oak. They're not looking for wood. That's the whole point of a Solera system, is that you're building it over, 50 years, so that the wood is old, so you're not getting loads of tannic impact, and you get this freshness. I mean, sherry at its heart is bone dry, absolutely the driest wine. The best phenos you'll ever have. Basically, you get salted meat, anything dried meat, and very salty fish and olives, and drink bottles of Fino, and it's the best thing you'll ever have in your life. But to do that, they don't want wood, they don't want oak. So if you've got a cooper who's tasting the oak like they do in France, in California, where you want lots of wood flavors, that's not good for sherry. So they want charred wood that doesn't give off all these flavors, and they can manage. So does that make sense? This is a very
No, it makes a lot of sense. No, that makes sense.
horrible rabbit hole.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
but it's kind of a neat rabbit hole. Is there a chance you could drop like a list of sherry suggestions in the chat for those of us who aren't really into sherry at all? Because that would be kind of fun to explore.
Yeah, happily. What I might do is I might sit and write a list for Sam afterwards, and you can send it around. Is that right? I mean, otherwise I'll be here for the rest of the time googling sherry. The easiest bodega to look at, because it's globally available, or the two easiest will be Lustau and Gonzalez Bias. And Gonzalez Bias make a very famous sherry called Tio Pepe, which I will put those in the chat. And Tio Pepe is a great example of what sherry is supposed to be, and it's not what you think. One, it's fairly cheap, and do not think it's going to be sweet. It is very dry in terms of flavor, and Finos are still, I mean, it still goes through a Solera. It's still aged in wood, but basically the process of making Fino is that you basically don't have a floor. So you basically have a floor. So this is basically it's a layer of yeast, and it means that you're not getting the oxygen on the wine. It means the wine stays very fresh, very crisp, very light. When we talk about elements of Islay, we're talking about Oloroso. So good international options on Oloroso would be something like Lustau, Oloroso, and this should be available wherever you go. And so if you try that Lustau, that would be a good idea of the kind of wine we're talking about. But what you have to bear in mind is, again, that wine isn't sweet. So when you try that, you're not going to go, oh, this is. We talk in the UK, we'll talk about like granny sherry, right? There's a style of sherry called cream sherry. It's called cream because it tastes like cream. It's buttery and sweet. And it's a mixture of Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez. And Pedro Jimenez, which I'm sure you've come across in whiskey circles, is very sweet. It's like treacle. It's thick. And the way they make Pedro Jimenez is they take the grapes, they dry them out on the side of a hill, and a bit like raisins. It's like trying to make wine from raisins, if you can imagine that. Yeah. So it's you've got this concentrated sugar. It makes this dense, heavy wine. So when you season the casks with that, the residual sugars, which are really high, like crazy high, it's like as rich in sugar as honey, that stays on the wood, which is why Pedro Jimenez aged whiskies are so thick and heavy and dense. And I think a lot of people, even you guys in the States, will associate whiskey, sherry with cream sherry that has this really sweet wine in it. But most, like Oloroso, actually is a dry wine. It's very nutty. Really, it's like you get hazelnuts and all these kind of dry flavors, and the sweetness is very low. It's not with no sugar to it. So that wine is used to kind of break down the wood. So you're not using it to add sweetness. You're using it to season the wood to break down the wood. So to give you better access. But if you try those two, so Tio Pepe Fino and then Lustau or also Don Nuno, you will see that these aren't sweet wines. So maybe you'll change your perspective a bit. I'm trying to think what Pedro Jimenez.
That's so interesting because I've always heard that whiskeys aged in a Pedro Jimenez or PX cask tend to be nutty, but you're saying that Oloroso is on the nutty side as the wine itself.
Wine, yeah. I mean, you go really nutty so you get into Montelados, which are kind of oxidized Olorosos, and they go very nutty. Pedro Jimenez. The best way to describe it is you don't really drink Pedro Jimenez. You pour it on ice cream. It's that thick. It's not. I'm trying to think. I think I would say Spinola. You'd be able to buy. Should be able to buy. Let me find that. If you look this up, you should be able to buy this for PX, and that'll kind of give you a really good, a good kind of breakdown between the three and the three kind of core styles. You then have Montellado, and you got. I mean, you can go deep into sherry. I mean, it's basically my second love. Third, depending on the weather, sometimes rum, sometimes sherry. But PX, it is all about the sugars. Like when you're buying the wine, even when I'm talking to producers about seasoning casks, they talk in sugar quantity. They're literally looking, the winemakers looking at the quantity of the sugar in the wine. That is what's interesting to them. And it's basically a dessert wine, very heavy, very rich, very dense dessert wine. It's got flavors like licorice and all these really heavy flavors, compared to Oloroso. So any kind of sweetness you taste in our whiskies when it's a sherry cask, like if you're trying this, you should hopefully get sweetness. You should get ginger. You should get chocolate. Those are wood flavors. It's access to oak. That's where that's coming from. Trying to bring it back to a whiskey chat without me losing my mind.
Yeah, no, it's really neat though to hear you talk about the spirit that's actually in the barrels before you get it, right? Or the wine. Because we have a lot of people on who talk about the sherry barrels and this and that, but it's neat to see the perspective of someone who's really into the product that comes before the whiskey.
Well, see, I don't know about you guys, but I always listen to. So I used to go to a lot of classes and listen to other people talk about products. I love the detail, right? I love even if you talk about distillate and looking at Lafroig and Caol Ila, and I love the small details of why they're different. I also love the fact that they're never the same, right? So a distiller's job, much like a cooper's job, is to try and rationalize the ever-changing world around them into this consistent thing. I think that job's amazing. I bow down to every distiller and every winemaker I've ever met. The difference in traditional wine countries like France is they celebrate the vintage, they celebrate the change. In distillation, we don't do that, and in wood, we don't do that. We talk about the consistency, right? I want a consistent cask to make the same whiskey because you guys are drinking this, you like this, and I've got to try and make it again. But actually, when you look at something like wood, what you're actually dealing with is an ever-changing picture of oak. The changing in seasoning in terms of how long you have to leave the wood outside. So if you go to a lot of coopers or you go to presentations, they'll talk about whether it's air dried or mechanically dried, and basically everyone wants air dried. But a great example is if you air dry your oak in Spain, and traditionally you do that for 18 months, but the temperatures in Spain have been so hot in the south of Spain, your humidity, the amount of water in your oak is disappearing quicker, right? So do you want to leave it outside for 18 months? Well, probably not, because it's going to get too dry and then it'll brittle and it'll break when you're coopering it. So now it's gone down to 15 months, but that doesn't sound as good in the marketing, right? It doesn't sound as good if it sounds like they're cutting a corner. But what they're actually doing is allowing for the change in climate. So I love the fact that you've got these producers that are working in environments that are changing. And like when it comes to the wine, the acidity is changing, the quantity of alcohol is changing, and you're having to make allowances for that to try and get to the same thing that you had before. I think it's pretty amazing. I actually think that's a much more interesting story. I get that most marketers think it's really hard work to talk about all the things that are changing all the time. So yeah, I find this aspect, the coopering the wine, I find it fascinating because they all make small indents into your profile, you know, whether it's how much sugar is in your Pedro Jimenez, and you can test it, right? So if you get an XPX cask, you can find residual sugars from the wine, so that's impact on your whiskey. You know it's there, and if that sugar content's changing, I could be buying from the same producer, but if the sugar content's changing because of basically because of the weather, that's changing my profile. And then as a blender, my next job is to change my blend to allow for this change in profile, which I had no control over. Yeah, it's
How do you feel about port casks?
port casks. Well, you know, it's interesting because I like most people who love these things, I had an idea what port casks were, and then I was sitting with someone who drinks a lot of port, wrote a book on port, and he's like, yeah, it's kind of a nonsense, because we don't really use wood in the way that you describe in whiskey. Like, we always describe wood use in wine in the same way we use it in whiskey, and it's kind of a nonsense, not how it's done. So if you want casks that have held port for a long time, you're talking about tawny, and you're not talking about vintage port. Like vintage, that's not the thing. Vintage port goes into wood for 18 months, comes out, and they use different styles of wood. So you end up working with coopers. I've got a cooper in France I do quite a lot of work with, mainly for Madeira, not for port. And what they do is they'll create wood, and they rent it to a winery in France who season it with red wine. They then empty the red wine, then they rent it to a producer in Madeira, because the producer in Madeira don't want wood tannins, so they want something that's already had something in it. They want a cask that's already had red wine in it, and then they will put their Madeira in it for 4 to 5 years, and then we buy that cask. So I've got
Wow.
and that's when you start to realize the timelines are kind of mental, because you've got the seasoning of the wood that's like 18 months outside, and then you've got the putting wine in it for a year and a half, and then we've got putting Madeira in it for 4 years, and then we get to buy it. So I mean that port and Madeira is similar. You have to work with a cooper who can create this through line for you.
So when you go through that long process, I mean, do you end up buying the barrels and staves so you can and assemble them, or do you buy finished cask? And then, I mean, one can only imagine having to go through that process. Not all the barrels are gonna be usable at I mean, just because it's been worked on so many times.
So in terms of, it's completely dependent. If it's something like Elements of Islay, when you're working with a sherry cask produced at Miguel, you're buying when you need it, and that's why a lot of companies go to him, because he takes all the investment and all the risk, and he's recouping those casks when he sends them out to you, right? It's not like he empties them from the bodega and sends them without looking at them. They're sent back to the cooperage, they're worked on and sent to you, so they will come in fixed. If I work with a company like Carcinolia, I buy the wood after it's been seasoned outside, so before it goes into the bodega. So I buy the oak at that point, or I'll put money down on the oak at that point, and then he's paying for the seasoning, so he'll pay for the must that goes in, or the time it sits in the bodega. And then when it comes out of the bodega, he'll recuperate, fix any problems, any holes, anything like that, and then send them out to us. If you're working with on something like Madeira, you sign up to a contract that basically says, I'm going to buy X amount of stock each year for the next 5 years. So you've got a 5-year contract with them essentially, and then that allows them to invest to plan the wood. But each time they're emptying them, they're recuperating them, so they're re-looking at them. It doesn't mean that we don't get problems. So more often than not, we'll get at least a couple of broken staves. But we fill most of our wood in Speyside. So where I am, we don't fill on Islay. And I've got Speyside cooperage 15 minutes from me, so the guys will come down and repair anything and fix it. So, you know, there is lots of risk. It is lots of broken things. It's surprising how many broken casks you get, but there's always a guy with a hammer who can fix them. Not me. I'm not practical in any way.
Sounds like an analogy for life. There's always a guy with a hammer who can fix things.
Right. And that, I mean, I find that whole process, it's fascinating, right? How many, some of those things that we don't necessarily pay attention to when we just sit here and enjoy a dram.
That's normally why I enjoy a dram at the end of the day, if I'm honest. It's all those things.
I can understand.
Should we move on to Beach Bonfire?
I think most people have been drinking it.
It is.
Well, there you go. So there's a couple of, this is a slightly more complicated whiskey, so there's a bit more wood chat if you want it. And it's made of three distillates, so it's about 66% of it's Kalila. It's a one-off blend, so this isn't an ongoing blend. It's part of a trilogy because I like films, and you know, who doesn't want a trilogy, right? So it's
Well, after you release the trilogy, you're gonna have 2 prequels and another sequel. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, George Lucas made a lot of money. You can't knock it, right? So clearly a clever man, although the first prequel was terrible. So anyway, if we're going to Star Wars, it's not worth it. Anyway, so it was originally, the idea was that we would do a bottling for Feshiel. There's a festival on Islay every year that celebrates culture and music and whiskey on Islay. And if you've never been, it's worth a visit. The population of Islay is about 3,000 people, and about 3,000 people visit Feshiel each year. So 6,000 people on an island that normally has 3,000 people. It's an interesting time. And we wanted to do something to kind of bring people together on the island and think about how we would celebrate the elements on Islay. So the brief I was given was fire. Can you make a whiskey like fire? So after I made some sarcastic comments about, you know, new make and whiskey being hot, blah blah blah, I decided to really focus on kind of experiences on Islay that made me think of Islay. So the first one was Beach Bonfire. We own a piece of land on the south coast of Islay where we're building a small distillery called Port and Trin. And as part of that piece of land, we have a little beach, a little inlet. And I had this dream that we would actually set up a giant bonfire on the side of the beach and trying to imagine all the flavors that would come together. Everything up until this point, by the way, has been very technical. And now I'm going to sound a bit arty, and I apologize deeply and profusely. I'll tell you now, I studied philosophy, so this is my actual way of thinking. Don't judge me. When I look at flavors, when I try to put something together, I am very visual. I see, as I taste, I see colors and places, particularly places. That's kind of where it's how I taste. I have to work quite hard to talk it into flavors for other people rather than places, because places doesn't make as much sense for most people. So I tried to build a whiskey that made me see a beach bonfire on Islay. So I was imagining white sands and what kind of flavors that were evolving in my brain, and that was for that I was using the Florigan Festival bourbon, that kind of banana-y sweet, verging on kind of tropical but still smoky. Then you've got the surroundings on Islay, which is all kind of earthy, mossy. When you go to the beaches there, you're surrounded by lots of kind of long grass, and in my head that was herbaceous flavors. It's a herbaceous place. So we had a whiskey from Bunnahabhain, a very lightly peated whiskey. It's actually called Ardnahoe, which is very confusing, but that was the old make name before they built the distillery. And it was aged in first fill American oak sherry hogsheads, and it gave this really herbaceous That's the only way I can describe it, flavor. And for me, that was the surrounding of the beach. And then from there, I needed to build up the fire. So we were using firstly some Kalila in, I mean, Diageo call them new wood, but modern day you'd call them STRs. So it's wine casks that are then toasted, so shaved and toasted. So you still get some of the wine flavors, the sweetness. And we bought this pasta Kalila, and the best way I can describe it is it tastes kind of like wine gums. It was sweet and rich. And for me, that's kind of the center of the fire. It was bright and red. And then we used a certain amount of Oloroso sherry butts Kalila, which was the kind of darker, heavier sky, and that's the kind of nightscape. So my idea was I would try and build this whiskey to create a place. So as you taste it, I'm trying to take you somewhere. That was the idea. And using all these different parts of the distillate to build that up. Does that make sense? It's all right. You had quite a few to drink now, so now everything makes sense. That's why we put this further in the tasting.
No, we all here sitting crying because it's such a beautiful story.
So yeah, so this is Beach Bonfire, and it's the start of a trilogy. So we did this one first because we actually launched it on the beach with a bonfire and a band, and it was great fun, and it was genuinely everything that I thought it should be. You watch the sun come down, and the whole place became it's rich, it's smoky, it's Islay, so you can't not smell peat everywhere you go because it's on fire somewhere on the island. So hopefully you get that balance between richness, peat, fruit, lots of fruit, and that slightly kind of herbaceous sweetness from the Bunnahabhain.
So you said this is Kalila and Bunnahabhain and what?
Lefroy. So the Lefroy's about 15%, so it's on the smaller side, and the Bunnahabhain's about 18%, and that's so it's an unpeated make, relatively peated make, and then the rest is Kalila.
I'm seeing a theme, a lot of Kalila and Lefroy in this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're using more Bunnahabhain today, so yeah, we fill quite a bit at Bunna, and I fill both peated and unpeated. I'm a massive fan, actually. Bunnahabhain's fantastic, and if you want a distillery that is probably my favorite on Islay. The manager there, Andrew Brown, is just brilliant. He tells you everything you shouldn't, but he's a great example of a distiller, because a lot of distillery tours you're told the production method is it's singular, right? We ferment for 72 hours, and we use X many tons of barley. We ferment for X hours. We use this yeast strain, and then we distill like this, and that's it. That's how it happens. And then you speak to someone like Andrew, it's like, well, that's never how it actually happens, because the barley turns up and it's different to last time. So then you adjust the mill, and then after you've done that, it's not mashing properly, so you have to adjust the temperatures in the mash. And then after you've done that, you kind of look at the ferments, and it's not, maybe you have to pitch at a different temperature, so then you have to change the fermentation times. And I love the fact that's how whiskey's made. It's not constant. It's not set recipes. It's people adjusting things all the time to try and get to somewhere. I think there's something quite magical about that.
For sure.
Cool. What do you guys make of Beach Bonfire?
I'm a fan.
Yeah.
Probably my of the four, this is my favorite.
Yeah, just on the name alone, this was the one I was the most interested in, and it doesn't disappoint. I'm saving a little bit to go back to tomorrow, so it's not the fourth one I've had, but good stuff.
Yeah, so it's part of a trilogy. So we've actually done the next one coming out is Fireside, which I wanted to start, but I was shut down, and that's about going inside and basically getting drunk next to a fireplace and playing games, which is definitely the next stage in your journey on Islay. And it's a similar idea. It's taking a place. For me, it was a place that I knew immensely well, having got very wet and had to get dry on Islay a few times, and had a pack of cards and not much else. So we got that one, and then the third one's next year, which I can't tell you about. We've not done it yet.
So on the beach bonfire, the sheet Sam put up, it says only 480 bottles in the US. I mean, how many bottles did you make of this?
So it wasn't huge, and we did 2 editions. So we do an edition for Islay. We do that every year at Cask Strength, and we do a couple of 100 bottles of that, and then and that's sold on Islay, and money from that sale goes back to the community. And then I want to say we did about 600 cases, whatever that makes, into bottles.
And is that your typical batch size, if you will, or?
It kind of ranges. So in an ideal world, I try to look at about 50 to 60 casks, and it's because I'm cheap. If you hadn't noticed, I don't have a Scottish accent. My mother's from Yorkshire, and if we can save money in Yorkshire, we do. And I worked out a long time ago. We make everyone in Scotland look very generous. I worked out a long time ago that you could move sensibly on a wagon about 60 casks. So it's cost effective to move to do 60 cask batches. It's also quite good from a vat size point of view. And it's a great size to work with from a bench point of view, because I can do 60 cask sample from the best. So they tend to be around that size, although like even our core products tend to be around that size. So if you try Cascade or a cherry cask, we tend to do around 50 to 60 casks per batch, build that up, get consistency in that. We overblend now, and we put back, so each kind of Solera-esque, each batch we overmake, we then put some of the whiskey back to wood, and then we use that in the next batch to create consistency again. But yeah, not huge quantities. At the end of the day, we're not a giant we're not a giant company. We're a small company. We're a small family business. When I started, it was myself with Elixir Distillers, at least. It was myself and Seginder and our designer. And today, well, I think I worked out the other day, it's about 60 people, but then we bought a distillery and built a distillery, so that kind of increased the numbers quite a bit. So it's still family run. My boss is still the same man it's been for the best part of 15 years, and we're still heavily involved in making stuff. So because of that, you're still looking at kind of small scale production, relatively. Obviously, one person's small scale is someone else's like massive. I'm sure there's independent bottlers out there. If you say we do 60 cask batches, they'd melt. Certainly that's how I found it when we started doing bigger batches. But I find that size gives us good control.
Cool.
So we just shared that poll in the group for everybody's favorite of the first 4, and yeah, I think this was an obvious one. Oliver, do you want to guess what the favorite is?
Was it Beach Bonfire by chance?
By a long shot. Over half the people selected that as their favorite.
It's well, I'm glad. I love things which give you an excuse to have some fun. I mean, I definitely I love whiskies that take you places. I think that is important. So I hope that we make quite a few of those. Right, should we do some rum?
Let's do it. I'm curious how blending rum is different from blending whiskey. I mean, the approach has got to be interesting. And have you ever had the urge to blend some Islay whiskey with rum and call it a day?
Not yet, but well, I'll tell you a little bit about small project in Islay where we can do that. So we've been bottling rum since 2010. In our company history, we were a shop, right? We were retailers at our heart. And when I joined the company, we used to have about 1,000 different whiskies on the shelf and probably about 250 rums. And so rum was always kind of something we were enthusiastic about. Black Top, the origins of Black Top come out of the fact that Secunda got offered a couple of flagons, that's 4.5 litre stone ceramic flagons full of rum, which were filled with rum that was used for the British Navy. So up until July 31st, 1970, the British Navy used to give rum to every single sailor every day. It was their rum ration. And that has a history going back over 100 years. And it was basically, it was this tradition, and it originates out of the fact that you wouldn't drink water at sea, right? Because you'd die. And if you look back in European history, all the navies used to ship alcohol, and the alcohol largely depended on where you were from. So if you were from France, it was brandy, and if you were in the Netherlands, it was Geneva, and if you were in the UK, it was beer. The problem with beer is it's heavy, you have to take a lot of beer. And the reason you did that is because you didn't die if you drank alcohol. Every time I see the warning labels on alcohol, I laugh. Today, obviously, once it was safe, today it's not. And then the British history of rum kind of all changes around Jamaica, and they were a relatively rubbish navy, and then they conquered Jamaica and they found Kill Devil, which is today what we call rum. And it turns out that British people were really motivated by alcohol. So on the discovery of rum, and you starting to take rum on board instead of beer, easier to transport, you didn't have to take as much of it, it's very strong. They then started to offer out rum rations as motivation. So there's this story that one of the motivations of the British Navy was that you got a pint of rum a day, a pint of rum before battle, and a pint of rum after battle. And the reason for the before battle and after battle was that if you saw an enemy ship and you weren't motivated, you would obviously be like, oh, well, we're not going over there. But if you told British people, I'll give you rum if you go fight those people, turned out they were quite highly motivated. So rum became this kind of central part of the Navy, and that then became formalized, and it ended up, even until 1970, every sailor had a ration of rum, and it was part of their daily routine. You'd stand up, they'd all queue up. You'd have rum grog, which was rum, water, and citrus all mixed together, and you drink it there and then. You could swap your ration with people, and there was so much rum being used in the Navy, it didn't make sense to buy bottles, so they used to buy bulk, and they would literally buy bulk from around the world, shipping rum back to the UK and blending it. To give you an idea of scale, if the Navy rum had been a brand, it would have been bigger than Bacardi. They were drinking a lot of rum. And what they used to do is they'd ship this rum into the UK. They had two vintage yards where they blend the rum, one in Portsmouth, one in London, and they'd be blended in these massive vats, which were always kept at least a third full. And the idea was that they would create consistency by blending them in these massive vats. The reality is there was no consistency because they were always buying from different countries. They had certain countries that featured a lot in the blend, so it would be Guyana, Trinidad and Barbados. Jamaica came in and out to the blend. It was obviously there at the beginning. There's a point where there's bits of record that say that the Navy asked not to use Jamaica because the sailors didn't like it. And then it's put back in the 40s because they couldn't get rum from other countries during the war. So it's in the blend in the 40s and the 50s. But they would also be buying rum from Australia. They buy rum, basically, if there's a port and they can stop there and they can buy rum, they bought rum. and then they bring it back to the UK and they blend it. And basically, just in the early 2000s, so in the late 90s, all this rum that had been blended up until 1970, it'd all been put into flagons. In the 1990s, the Navy sold a lot of it off to make space. And two old sailors sold Sukinda a couple of flagons, and he thought, well, this is kind of interesting. He originally bought it because it was quirky. Have it in my collection. Looks interesting. Then someone offered him 10 flagons. And he thought, well, I'm not going to buy 10 flagons without knowing what it tastes like. So he opened it up and tried it and thought, this is amazing. And then he went on an expedition to find as many flagons as he could. And we ended up making a product called Black Top Last Consignment, which we released in 2010. And for a long time, that was the only rum that we sold. It was about $1,000, so it wasn't cheap. Mainly because we couldn't remake it. That was it. When it was gone, it was gone. And then in 2017, I said, well, look, I can't carry on trying to sell this $1,000 rum. We probably need something a bit more accessible. So we decided to blend our own rum. So take that idea of global blending and create Black Top Finest Caribbean. So the rums that in the one that you've got focus on those kind of 4 key areas, so Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana, which were the kind of spiritual homes of Navy rum. And we wanted to build a rum that was really approachable, that everyone could get into and become your daily top, much like the Navy. For that reason, it's not full of licorice and heavy notes. A lot like the original Navy rum was really dense, really heavy. We've gone a bit lighter and a bit sweeter, just to make it a bit more approachable. Yeah, so that's Black Top. So that's where you're starting, and that's Finest Caribbean. It's 46.2% alcohol, so it is non-chill filtered. There's nothing added. There's no sugar added. There is caramel colouring in one of the blended components, and that's going to sound, well, it's not caramel colouring, it's colouring. Should be very clear on that. And that's the tradition out of Guyana. Guyana used to sell all their rums by colour. And what they used to do is they'd take molasses and they'd wrap it in the casks, and then they'd pour the rum in, and they'd just change the colour. And then they would sell you whatever coloured rum you wanted. So it's not quite the same as the caramel colouring we use in whiskey. And you can still buy rum like that from Guyana if you like, which we do. And it creates a slightly different texture and feel. So we created this blend in it took 2 years. 2 years and 27 blends or something before we were happy with it. So the one you are trying, you're in the States where we blend 26. I think it's 26.
So is this part of your daily rations at the office, or only if you go to war?
I tend to have a daily ration of New Make Spirit from Tormore at the moment, because of my job rather than whiskey or rum. But I quite like the idea of a daily ration. I think that's a very sensible way of drinking. I love the fact they used to sell their rations so you could swap it for jobs. Like, I don't do any mopping today. Do you want to do my mopping for me? Here's my rum. So even the name, Black Top comes from the last day of the tot, July 31st, 1970, and the sailors were so upset by the fact that the tot was taken away that they had a funeral, hence the name Black Top Day. So there's pictures. You look them up online, it's insane. They had a funeral across the world for the tot. It wasn't a choice by the Navy; it was a choice by the British government. Who, the reasoning was fairly sound. We've got nuclear weapons on ships and rum, and that's probably not sensible. But yeah.
Could go wrong.
Hopefully you guys find. I mean, when Mitch Wilson, our brand ambassador, does this, he's much more rum focused. Obviously, I come from a whiskey background. This is a whiskey drinker's rum, in my mind. I built this on what I like, so it's quite dry. It's not really sweet. It is more spirit focused. I speak to a lot of rum drinkers who will say to me, "Ah, yes, but it's not super funky. It's not this." And it's like, no, it needs to be balanced, because from where I come from that kind of whiskey side, you're looking for balance. So I'm hoping what you find is it is rich and it's weighty, that you do get a bit of licorice, and you do get some of that kind of banana funk that is the Jamaica. We use a bit of Jamaica in this, about 5%. We use quite a bit of Barbados, and that's that kind of honey sweetness, but it's light and it's hopefully balanced against that Guyana dense licorice, and then recently we brought in Trinidad, and that's because I've been working a lot with Trinidad for MBR, which is the other rum we're going to try. And I love the kind of stone fruit thing you get from that. And what we're just trying to do is to build the rum much the way we're going to build whiskies.
Can you talk about the distilleries you're sourcing these from? Because I can only think of one in Barbados. Are those?
We can. So I mean, we try to be, where we can, we're as transparent as you can be in rum. There are a few on Barbados. We use Foursquare in this blend, but in some of our other blends in MBR you're going to try, we also use Mackay. In terms of Guyana, it is just Demerara Distillers Diamond, which kind of collection of different distilleries. They create a blend for us, so it's a blend of different marks together that we use. And then in Jamaica, in this blend, it's Worthy Park, so it's a 3 to 5 year old Worthy Park. And then Trinidad is just Trinidad Distillers. Again, it's a blend from Trinidad, from Angostura essentially, that's created for this. I always describe Finest Caribbean as it's a bit like painting, right? So if you look at an art, like all these famous artists, they'll quite often create their own colors, they'll create their own paints. But if you go paint your house, what you do is you go down to your department store and you just pick a color, and that's produced for you. I don't know if you have this in the States, but I can go to shops and they create the color in front of you. It's white, and so you can be more specific about what you want. In the Finest Caribbean, that's essentially what we're doing. So we receive blends into us. So the Foursquare is a hot column blend from Foursquare, aged for 5 years or so in Barbados, and then shipped. Everything in Finest Caribbean is aged in the Caribbean before being shipped to Europe. Most of the rums historically came from a blender in Amsterdam called Skia, who kind of a big blending house. Today we buy some direct, buy some from Skia. And what that means is that we're basically given these components to work with to build. So it's not quite the same as whiskey blending, where we're working cask by cask. We work in quite big batches that come in. Does that make sense? It's not as romantic, basically.
So you were talking about the colors of paint down there, yeah. So we were there over this past Christmas and New Year's, and was told this story that the local government decided what colors to use, but they also forgot to tell them that the guy who made the decision also owned the company that made that color.
Okay.
So
yeah, I mean, rum is definitely a slightly different world to whiskey.
yeah,
Regulation isn't a thing. I mean, that's not entirely true. There's regulation by country. One of the things that is really difficult, like coming from a whiskey background, we focus on Scotch, right? Scotch is one country, heavily regulated in terms of production. If you think about world whiskey, the regulations differ massively. You know, even if you look at the US and you look at bourbon, you don't have the same age regulations we have. In fact, one of the bugbears for the SWA is that in the States, whiskey is anything that's aged, and in Europe, whiskey is something that's more than 3 years old. So you know, you could bring American whiskies into Europe that are, say, 2 years old. They're whiskey on the shelf in the States, but they're not whiskey in Europe, right? And so all that regulation is there, but it's by country, and then we have all these agreements in place. In rum, you have all these countries that we deal with. They all might have some regulation, but most of it's not enforced internationally anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. So it means that you're always dealing with all these different kind of descriptors or different ideas that are going on in terms of making flavor. But it does mean you've got a much wider range of flavors to play with. You've got a much wider range of things available.
It's so interesting. Yeah, I can't remember who we had this discussion with, but we essentially had a discussion of which spirit category is the wildest, like it has most flavor spectrum.
Yeah.
Whether it was, you know, if it would be rum or if whiskey as a general category. My argument was whiskeys that has the like, because you can go bourbon, you can go Scotch, you can go Islay, you can go rye whiskey, you know what I mean, like a rice whiskey. But somebody else was saying that, oh no, rum is just insane, right? Like there's so much variety in the world.
So there definitely is variety. There is a lot of variety in rum. Well, no, there's a lot of extremes. I think that's the difference. I'd actually argue that you have more variety in flavor even in Scotch than you have in most categories. But it's subtle differences. Whereas in something like rum, it's the extremities. There's a difference between variety and extremities. Does that make sense? So, you know, if you take Scotch, you can get extremities even in a bottle, and that's what we were trying to create in Black Top and rum. Is trying to create the fact that you have layers of flavor, so you're discovering things all the time. I think whiskey delivers that a lot more just in general. So you will find lots of flavors in one thing, and you will find a range of flavors, quite a large range of flavors in a category. But rum, what you will find is you can look at something like Jamaica, go to somewhere like Hampden or Worthy Park, particularly Hampden, and you'll be trying something that's like extreme, intense banana, and it's really intense, it's really out there, really fruity. But to the same extent, you go to Guyana, and it's like drinking treacle. Well,
Is that one of those things where, I mean, how soon can you call rum rum, right, as opposed to Scotch? So my question really is, if you know you're gonna make something, you're gonna distill something, you're gonna age it for quite some time, how much risk are you willing to take to not taste like what the average Joe thinks as Scotch is supposed to taste like, versus if you can do a distilled beverage that, okay, I put it in here for 6 months and see what happens, and maybe people like it, maybe people don't like it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much that as much as just the traditions involved in doing it. I mean, we obviously in Scotch whisky you base a lot in tradition. Today you have a lot of new distillers where it's a bit more scientific. You know, the kind of whole suite of Jim Swan distilleries where it's making whiskey to be drunk in 5 years' time. With quite specific profiles, both in terms of spirit style and wood style. In rum, yeah, you can drink it off the still, right? It's rum straight away. In most countries, although not in Australia, interestingly, it has to be 2 years old. And that means that obviously it's a bit like vodka and gin, your output's immediate, your sale is immediate. But a lot of the flavors are created because of tradition. there are some exceptions to that, such as, you know, your Richard Seals at Foursquare, who's very obsessed with making particular styles. But you take Guyana and the amount of styles that come out of Demerara Distillers, all of those styles are historic, right? This is how they made run at Port Morant. This is how they made run at Islay. This is how those traditions just continue. Does that make sense? Yeah. Do we want to try MBR? As I realise I've been wittering on for almost 2 hours, and my wife will actually kill me. Right, so we're trying MBR 2022.
Ollie, as we, if I may, as we head into our last pour, I invite everyone to turn on their camera and join us for a quick toast to you. We want to thank you for joining us tonight and spending your night with us. Cheers to you. Cheers to everything you're doing. Thank you very much for sharing these amazing spirits with us, and cheers to Sam as well for setting this up. So thank you so much. Cheers.
No, thank you guys, and thank you so much to Sam for putting together. I don't get to talk about the fun stuff that often. I spend a lot of time talking about spreadsheets. So at least this is a good chance to share information and stuff.
Awesome. Cheers, everyone.
Yes.
I wanted to mention how humble Ollie is. He's a legend. I can say that with the whole confidence, but the way he introduces himself is just amazing. You're the champion of being a humble man, Ollie. We love you.
Chancer, not humble, but thank you. Anyway, can we talk about rum now? So MBR is probably closer to, in terms of blending, is probably closer to my happy place because it's casks, right? It's individual things. You can go and touch them and look at them. We actually do most of this blending today at Tormore, so we do it all in Speyside. So most of the rum here, you'll see, like if you go to the website, it tells you the full blend breakdown of everything that's in it. And you'll see a lot of it's tropical aged and then continental aged. The continental aging tends to happen in either Liverpool or nowadays, at least some of it's done up in Speyside in Scotland, just because I've got a warehouse over there full of rum. So you can, it's easier to go and touch it and look at it and stroke them. Don't do that too often because you get splinters. MBR originates out of an anniversary bottling. So when we launched Black Tot in 2019, we realized that 2020 was the 50-year anniversary of Black Tot Day, and it felt like something we should do to celebrate it. And the brief was, whatever you want to do, you can do. Whatever rum you want to use, you can use. So we did. And that blend included 40-plus-year-old Port Morant. It included Caroni, so rum from Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana. And we thought at the time, no one will ever do anything like this again. The problem was we made too much. We made about a third too much for the amount of bottles and packaging we had. So we decided to put that rum back to wood and create basically we call it a perpetual blend. So you're always keeping a third back, and then you use that the following year. But one of the things, the bits of history about the original last consignment that I don't think is talked about so much is that it changed, right? So availability of rum changed, much like we were talking about with whiskey. Your availability is always changing, so then you're reblending, right? And you're changing your blend. And sometimes you can taste it. So we thought, wouldn't it be great to every year release something that's a change? So we'll have our perpetual blend, our thing that's not moving, from year to year. And then we'll add different countries. We will explore different flavors from around the world. And so that's what MBR is. We launch it every year around Black Top Day. so around the 31st July, and we are trying to show different blends, different ideas, different flavors each time. The one you guys are trying is 2022, and it's fair to say 2022 is when I was left alone in a room a bit too long. So the first blend had like 9 components, so 9 different rums. This one has 20 something, and if we did make sure that you could go and look it up, so you can do that. You can see every percentage of everything that's gone into it on blacktop.com. And it actually started with Jamaica, and I was looking at making a Jamaican rum just because I could, right? I had all these things where I could blend out the kind of heavy funk using older rums. So, it's got some 24-year-old Clarendon in it, and then it's got some 3-year-old, 24-year-old Clarendon, and then some 27-year-old New Yarmouth, and like it was this whole idea that you could blend these things together and create something that's holistic, just from Jamaica. But Black Tot is always a global blend, and Saginda came to me and said, I really like this kind of chocolatey dense style. Could you make a rum like that? So we started creating these blends from different countries. So it's got a blend from Guyana, a blend from Barbados, a blend from Jamaica, and a blend from Trinidad, and then mixing those together with our perpetual blend. And it became more and more complicated, but I tried to see each country blend as a block in the blend, so you could build, right? You build together. So it's like the best way to describe it is kind of like cooking. If you're making a curry, you make a spice mix, and that spice mix has lots of components, and then that makes one thing that you put into your dish. And I very much see blending rum today like that, building up flavors, and I think it allows you to build layers and layers of complexity. So hopefully what you get from this is you end up with these kind of dense chocolatey notes, this richness coming through. It's got small amount of it's got quite a lot of rum from Trinidad. About 22% of it comes from Trinidad, which has got a small amount of Caroni, that dense kind of petrol-y thing coming through. It's majority Guyana, about 29% of it is Guyana, and a lot of that is a pot column blend that's about 7 years old, 5 years in the Caribbean, about 2 years in the UK. And again, that's about building up that richness, that kind of licorice chocolate tone. We used a little bit of much older Guyana as well. And then the Barbados, we were talking about Foursquare, using Foursquare. So we used a couple of different blends from Foursquare, one older, one younger. And then I came across some pot still Mount Gay, which was 19 years at the time. And it was kind of fat and heavy, but it tasted like I don't know, you guys have different chocolate in the States, right? You got really sweet chocolate. We get this you get milk chocolate here, but if you go over to Belgium, you get this really dense kind of milk chocolate. It's like they're like almost viscous. And that for me was the kind of Barbados side. We were building up this kind of milk chocolate, dense, almost like honeycomb thing. Anyway, so that's what you guys are trying. It's a blend we do each year. It is quite literally my excuse to have fun in the warehouse. I am currently working on 2025 because we have to work a year ahead. We've actually bought all the rums for 25 and 24. So the idea being that each year you kind of build up and you make a new blend, a new idea, and you can follow that journey and you can see different flavors in rum. But like whiskey, balanced, hopefully.
It's definitely much different than an Islay Scotch.
It is that, yeah. I definitely think rum after whiskey.
Yeah, Yeah.
rum whiskey is possibly a thing maybe one day. See. Do you guys have any questions at this point?
Yeah, so blending different spirits has become a big thing now that I've seen. Any thoughts about that? I don't know if you.
We've not got into blending different spirits yet. I'm not sure where it was set on the portfolio. What we are doing is we're moving. I mean, we've been moving steadily towards distillation quite some time. So obviously we have Tormore, we distill there. We're building this distillery on Islay, and the plan is to be able to distill rum there as well. So we're very focused at the moment on understanding distillation of different spirits and how you create flavor at that level. I definitely see synergies between particularly rum and whiskey. I struggle with the synergies with, say, tequila and mezcal. I love mezcal. I don't understand anyone using casks from mezcal or tequila. It's mental. Doesn't make sense. I'm not even that big fan of rum casks because most of them are rubbish. And I mean literally rubbish, falling apart. But in terms of blending spirits, I feel like that interaction with wood works quite well. We've been using a bit of Calvados, like you get a nice impact. And we use a lot of the casks. So whenever we're blending rum, we'll quite often blend into wood. And if I fill the wood, then I tend to use it for whiskey afterwards. So I do a lot of sherry at the moment. We've got a rum coming out later in the year, which has a big sherry influence, and part of that I have to use seasoned casks as part of the production method. So I empty those casks there, so they're sherry seasoned casks that then have rum in for like a year, 2 years, and then I'll use that for whiskey, and I find that impact is fantastic. But actually blending the two spirits together, no, that freaks me out. I'll be honest. That's what cocktail guys do. I mean, I can go to a bar for that. They know what they're doing. I haven't got a clue.
I mean, it's all about flavor, right? But okay. Since you brought up Tormore, it's a distillery that I'm curious about. I know you guys recently purchased it. Can you tell us a little bit about? I know there's a couple of independently bottled Tormores coming to the States soon. I'm sure those are before you guys acquired it. So what can we expect in the future for Tormore?
What can we expect for Tormore? Well, at some point we will release a single malt from Tormore. I mean, there's been single malts from Tormore before, though not for a few years. It's an amazing distillery.
There's some amazing independent bottlers putting out Tormore.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some great spirits. I mean, it's a big. Historically, it's a workhorse distillery. Or it has been for Chivas for the last 20 years, and then even during the 90s, there was stock from Allied distillers. It's got an amazing history. It was actually only built in 1959, so it's a relative baby of a distillery. It's quite young, and it was built by Shenley Enterprises. So it was US owned, and actually all the makeup of the distillation equipment is to make, at the time, what they felt was distillate whiskey for America. So it's quite the distillate's quite light, it's quite sweet, and it's quite fruity. You get lots of pears and apples and those kind of things. It is completely mental from a production point of view. It makes no sense. We have 3 different tun rooms all running at different temperatures, which means we basically pitch yeast at different temperatures across the site. The whole place is crazy. It has a copper roof, which I found out cost £1.2 million to replace. Not sure why anyone would do that, but they did. And it's a listed building, so we can't change anything. But the distillation is great. We have some of the biggest purifiers you'll ever see. Well, you have to come. At some point we will open to the public and everyone can come and visit. At the moment it's a bit of a mess. We are trying to fix, and we're doing an awful lot of work on the stock. So most of the whiskey we bought at the distillery was for blending. It was filled into refill wood at quite high strengths. So we've been doing a big re-rack program. We're currently about 2,000 barrels into our re-rack program here. And that involves taking the whiskey out of wood, bringing the strength down and putting back into better wood. In terms of profile and flavor, as I say, it's a light spirit. We're not making Glenallachie. We're not making, Glendronach. That's not us. It's not that whiskey. The way I describe it is the base spirit in American oak tastes a little bit like a pear tart, like an apple tart, quite crisp. It's got a kind of pastry note to it, biscuity note. And the whiskey we're building, what we're going to do is we're going to take that tart, we're going to turn it into a crumble or into a cobbler. It needs to be unctuous, because when you come here, and at some point you definitely need to visit, the people themselves are nuts, like they're mental, but they're really warm and they're really generous. So as Sam Bernachat, I live here, moved here with my family. And I moved here mainly because the people, they welcome you in. It's full of stories about mainly drunken debauchery. The example I give is John Campbell. You guys may have done tasting with John through Lot Lee, or maybe before Lefroy. So he was at Lefroy for 30 years, and Lefroy was owned by Allied, as was Tormore. They were sister distilleries going way back into the 70s. And when he started, he did 6 months at Tormore. And he said he had more stories from 6 months living at Tormore than 30 years living at Lefroy, because the people in Speyside are just so crazy, so warm, so generous, but they are always looking for fun. We bought the guys a sit-on mower, and before we knew it, they were doing races, which was not the point of the sit-on mowers. But anything you can turn into fun, that's what happens at Tormore. So yeah, plan is to have hopefully a single malt by 2026. So whiskey wise, we're getting there. Packaging wise, it's someone else's world.
Gotcha. Well, on those tasting notes, I just ordered myself a bottle. That sounds absolutely amazing. We've had you here for just over 2 hours, and I do want to be respectful of your middle of the night. I have a million other questions about the other brands you work on, and I've never had a bad single malt of Scotland, and I want to pick your brain on that. Hopefully we can organize something. You have quite a range there, and I tasted a few Clynelish. We did one evening at my house where everybody brought a different bottle of Clynelish, and we're all cask fours, so like we want proof, higher proof. And your 48% Clynelish was my favorite of the night, compared to like older, higher proof, just like
the reserve cask 2010, 2011 stock. They're really good. They're really tasty.
Yeah, it was absolutely phenomenal. So like hopefully we can set something up at some point just to talk about that whole range, a million things. All right, and we're so honored to have you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. I'll let someone else ask a question if they want to, but I do want to be respectful. Yeah, this is not the Vadim show. Jason, anything? John? No, if everybody's good. Well, so yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Everything was delicious, and it was such a pleasure to learn from you. If you're ever in the States or ever want to jump on a Zoom call with us again, we would love to have you. We'd be honored to have you again.
More than happy anytime. I hope to get to the States next year. I was supposed to come this year and failed miserably, so moved house and whatnot. But hopefully in 2025 we'll be back out to the US. I love coming out to the States, and last year I came to California with to see Sam and had a fantastic trip. So hopefully, if we can convince Sam, he'll have me back out in California.
If Sam will allow us, we'll be glad to roll out the red carpet for you.
Ollie, you owe me to finish those bottles of sherry cask, if you remember. I mean, sherry wine. They're still there waiting for you. We have a 30-year-old Pedro Jimenez and some 12-year-old Oloroso and 10-year-old Fino. So get ready. Thank you so much.
I have a bottle of Fino waiting for you when you come to visit. We got you.
Thank you so much, guys, and thank you for putting up with me and listening to me. It's always nice to talk about what you do.
Thank you, and we'll definitely take you up on that sherry introduction for sure. Sherry and cooperage. That's our next one. Awesome. Thank you, Ollie. Appreciate you.
Thanks, guys. I will.